Welcome to Tell the Kids. It's time for us to tell our kids our stories and create some children's literature. Welcome to step 2 of telling your kids. Now, last week, you should already have in hand from what you did last week, your dedication page, deciding who it is you actually want to write for. And then you should also have a list of some short narratives and long narratives. Long narratives being the bigger pieces of the pie, the short narratives being the pecan pieces that float to the top. Now, using your life chart that we talked about last week to organize your narratives, you should go ahead and decide which long narrative you want to start with. In other words, which piece of pie that you want to start with. So as we get going in the very first piece of pie, I want to talk a little bit more about the long narrative. A long narrative story has really a long time period, maybe several years, of a strong arc of rising and falling. So whenever we have a story arc, what we start with is what normal is. The beginning is a normal. How old was I? Where were we living? I'm introducing characters. This is our normal life. Then sometimes it's very good to go ahead and start as quickly as you can with a rise in tension. Now that may be through one of the short stories that you've written, like maybe you broke your arm, or maybe there was another sort of a difficulty in the family. Something that caused an impact during that time of life. I think that we can all find in our lives that there was something in each piece of life that proved a little bit more difficult than other parts. So in this arc, in this first piece of pie, think of that highest impact point, and you can either introduce it here at the very beginning or at least be working your way toward that. So then you have your highest impact, then you have a shift in life. What is new normal going to be? Well, now I'm starting school, or now we had to move somewhere, and there becomes then a new normal. So whenever we're thinking about the long arc, the longer storyline, this is the beginning and the end of our story. And we're going to put some pecan pieces in the middle of it. But as you begin to write, I think it's important to know where you're going to begin and where you're going to end. And that way you don't get confused as to, well, where does this end? How far do I keep writing? You know, it's interesting because Joyce Carol Oates said the first sentence can't be written until the final sentence is written. So what we're doing this week is actually writing the very first chapter and the very last chapter. Now, as you begin to write, I want you to also kind of make a rough outline. Now that you have your pie pieces created from your life chart, you can see your long narrative that you've chosen and some of the pecan pieces that have floated to the top of your memory during that time period. So you have your introduction, which we're going to work on this week, of who I am, where I was from, how old I was at the beginning of this piece of my life. And then you have our rise in action, or the long narrative that begins to get going. Now, between the beginning of the long narrative and the end of the long narrative, you have a lot of shorter stories that are going to fit in there. Like I said, those ones that maybe only take 2 or 3 minutes to tell, which means it's just going to be maybe 2 or 3 pages writing. So as you begin to go ahead and create your definite, as close as we can get it at this point, definite timeline on this specific piece of your life, we're going to start with the long narrative, and we're going to end with the long narrative in resolution. Now then, the second thing we need to do this week is we need to go ahead and make sure and find your voice. Now, your voice is unique, and the voice that you actually speak can be heard through your writing. I don't know if you've ever read a book where you're like, I know this person and I can really hear them, or if you've read something of someone you know. Now, writing does vary from speaking in that you get to choose which voice you're going to use. You can use first person present, which would be writing about me from the present about the past. Or you can write as if the past is right now and I'm speaking from that time. So that would be first person, right, like I'm 5 years old right now. Hi, my name is Anna and I'm from Texas and my mom and daddy's names are, you see what I'm saying? You can start that voice. Now, second person would be writing directly to the reader, meaning that you're kind of, now I want to write and I want to tell you about this. And this was a really funny thing that happened. And that's kind of usually how we speak. is in that I'm talking directly to you. You can write that way. It's a little bit more difficult, but if that's the way you want to write it, then you can write it that way. Now, a third person would be like writing about my life, as if I'm not that person. When Anna woke up in the morning, she always put on her cowboy boots because her dad had a farm out back that had to be taken care of. So you need to go ahead, though, and decide which voice are you going to use. Are you going to use first person from me right now, talking about me when I was little or younger, a different time period? Am I going to write first person as if I'm that little kid? Am I going to write that first person? Am I going to write in second person, where I'm talking to the person I've dedicated this book to? Hey, Lucy, I'm so glad you're reading. Let me tell you about a time that, you see. Or third person, where I'm writing as if I'm watching these things happen. And it's more like a narrator. Now then, as you get started, make sure and pick your voice and stick with it, because you can't change voices once you get started. So you better like the voice that you like. Now, I want you to write the first sentence of your long narrative. In other words, basically, you're just introducing yourself, where you live, how old you are, what your family is like, what the house was like that you remember growing up in, or whatever time period you're looking at. So, but I want you to write the first sentence or two, but I want you to kind of change the voices around and play with it, and decide which voice it is you want to write from. And once you've picked that voice, because you've read it and said, oh, I think I like this voice better, you may surprise yourself that it's not the one that you would have originally picked until you've written it down. Make sure maybe read it to someone that you can, and that's around you, a friend or a family member, and you can say, which one sounds better? And then you can go forward from there. Now, another thing I want us to make sure and remember as we're starting out is I want you to make a list of colloquialisms. And that would be like things that were said back in the day that aren't necessarily used now, like groovy or golly gee whiz, or, well, if you go back to the 80s, gag me with a spoon. But it may be something that maybe your grandma always called you, well, you sweet little puddinhead, or something like that. So not only colloquialisms of the time, go back and think about, well, what did we used to say when we were really excited? But also think about maybe what grandma used to always call me, or grandpa always used to say when he hit his thumb with a hammer. Maybe you don't want to write those down, I don't know. But go back and write down a list of those colloquialisms so you can kind of salt them through. Now, make sure that you have, as we go ahead and we're ending this up, make sure and write your introductory chapter this week, which means find your voice, your characters, your surroundings, and go ahead and just start it. And also go ahead and try a stab at writing the very last chapter, the resolution. I started first grade, we moved to Texas, or some other event that is going to close out this piece of your life. So as we end, I want to make sure and encourage you to remember, you have a voice that needs to be heard. Now, Natalie Goldberg once said as well, writers live twice. So as you write, remember that you're going to get to live your life over and over again every time your kids pick up your book. Y'all have a great day.